A shy girl leaves her umbrella behind in the rain, and the one who finds it is a millionaire who vanished from the public eye after a plagiarism scandal. On the handle, just a single line of text, yet it forces him to confront the truth he's been avoiding for 3 long years. They don't know each other, but beneath quiet passing rains, a story begins to rewrite itself through a kind of understanding that needs no name. If you've ever carried something you couldn't bring yourself to say, maybe, just maybe, you'll see yourself in this story. The rain began at 4 in the afternoon, not violent but not gentle either. It fell as if someone up in the sky had grown weary of sighing and their breath had turned into drops, heavy, deliberate, falling against the tin awning of a small cafe on the corner of Fremont Street, Seattle. Each drop met the uneven sidewalk with a soft percussion, steady as a soundtrack for anyone who had paused in their day. Across the street, Lara stood beneath the overhang of the old bookstore where she worked. Her thin sweater clung damply to her shoulders. She hadn't planned to stop by the cafe today, but the rain nudged her toward a different route. The awning at the bookstore was narrow, and she didn't like being seen, a slender figure with tangled hair, hands clutching the strap of her bag like she might slip away without it. She crossed the street when traffic thinned. Rain spattered up her jeans to her ankles. At the cafe steps, she quickly folded her cream-colored umbrella, now yellowed with time, and set it down. Her left hand trembled slightly, as it always did, after long days of quiet, simmering fatigue. The cafe door opened with a breath of warmth and fog. The smell of coffee mingled with the hush of strangers, the clink of spoons against ceramic. She stepped inside, leaving her old umbrella just outside the door, right at the threshold like she always did. No one paid her much attention. And that was something Lara had always been grateful for. She ordered a black tea and found a corner by the window, far enough not to be noticed, close enough to watch the rain washing sound from the world. Time slowed inside the cafe, as if the clock had grown tired. Lara didn't check her phone or glance at her messages. She simply placed her copy of Bird by Anne Lamott on the table, brushing her fingertips over the pages as though searching for a line that might rescue this day from drifting into nothing. About 20 minutes later, the cafe door opened again. A man stepped in, his dark wool coat heavy with rain, shoulders slightly bowed. He ran a hand through wet hair and swept his gaze across the room, not urgently but not indifferently. Those amber eyes seemed practiced in watching without being watched. His name was Caleb Rayner. 3 years ago, his name was on book covers and magazine spreads. Now, only those who had read closely, who had once believed in words deeply, would remember it, a half-buried memory. He ordered a black coffee, no sugar. Then turned toward the window, the same direction as the forgotten cream-colored umbrella. He paused when he saw a young man reaching for it, perhaps thinking to use it as shelter for his exit. The man smiled when no one claimed it. Caleb raised his hand slightly. That umbrella might belong to someone who just stepped in. It seems specific. He didn't know why he said that. Maybe it was the color, soft cream, fading. Maybe it was the way it had been placed, not dropped but left behind. Deliberately, the man nodded and moved on. Caleb picked up the umbrella. It was light as breath, damp and cool. On the handle, clinging beneath rainwater and the folds of soaked paper, was a small note. He peeled it away gently. The ink had blurred, but one line still emerged, faint but intact. "If you found this umbrella, please keep it. I don't need it anymore." Some things deserve to be protected by someone who still believes in kindness. Caleb stood there for a long time. He had written something like that once, back when he was still a different man, before he was called a plagiarist in the icy tone of headlines, before his closest friend, the one he used to write with, had died. He held the umbrella like a question still unanswered, a whisper from someone he'd never met, yet it stirred something deeper than anything he'd read lately. He asked the barista, "The girl who left this umbrella, do you know her?" The young woman shook her head, then paused. "There's her girl, long hair, grey sweater. She comes in sometimes and sits quietly, reads." Maybe it was her. Caleb nodded, noted it. He returned to his seat. set the umbrella beside his foot. His coffee had gone cold, but he still held the paper in his hand, as if letting it go might cause it to vanish with the rain. In another corner, Lara rose to leave. She didn't notice the man now silently guarding her forgotten umbrella. Didn't see the eyes that followed her, as if they had glimpsed something worth understanding. She stepped into the street, without an umbrella, but didn't look back. She thought, perhaps she truly didn't need it anymore, because sometimes leaving something behind is how you let it find someone who needs it more, or maybe simply you no longer have a reason to keep it. And so, the rain kept falling. But somewhere, something strange had begun to form. From an object everyone thought was ordinary, an umbrella left behind. The rain in Seattle in early autumn isn't like rain elsewhere. It doesn't come in torrents. It doesn't soak you with a grief you can name. It lingers, like a thought not yet spoken. And Caleb had returned to the old cafe 3 days in a row, through 3 steady rains, waiting for someone whose face he didn't even know. The umbrella still sat on the wooden chair in the far corner, right where he had left it, after carefully drying it. The note once clinging to its handle had been flattened, preserved in his wallet like a letter with no sender. No name, no number, nothing but the line, "If you've found this umbrella, please keep it." And Caleb still couldn't look away from those words. There was something about the note that made him feel seen, as if the writer understood what it meant to let go of something too heavy, while still hoping someone out there might hold it for you. Each time he came, he asked the cafe staff, All they remembered was the vague outline of a girl, long hair, pale skin, quiet, always alone, always at the window reading. Did she leave her name? Anything? Caleb asked on his 3rd visit. The barista shook her head, then paused. Actually, the other day after she left, I found a slip of paper tucked under her book. I threw it away, though. Caleb went quiet for a moment, then smiled gently. It's okay. Thank you. But he hadn't let it go. That evening, back in his ivy-covered attic apartment, Caleb sat still before the umbrella, dry now, resting on the table like a relic of something half-remembered. He didn't know what he was searching for anymore, but he opened it anyway carefully, like unfolding a wartime letter, and when the desk lamp passed through the soft yellowed fabric, he saw it. A faint stain of ink near the transparent plastic of the handle, tiny, nearly invisible. Caleb leaned in, reached for his magnifying glass, the one he used for old manuscripts, and examined it closely. Beneath the layer of clear plastic, barely visible, was a single line written at a slant. It looked like it had been written with a soft pencil, then sealed in by the plastic. Lara M. Just a name. No surname. No address. But for Caleb, a man who had lived a life in words, it wasn't just a name. It was a trail, a sign, a pinpoint on the map leading towards something that mattered. He closed his eyes and repeated it in his mind. Lara. 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 And from that moment, the name became a place he returned to whenever his thoughts wandered through questions without answers. The next day, Caleb went back to the cafe, the umbrella in hand. Rain again, light but thick. Condensation blurred the cafe windows like unspoken sadness, fogging up a corner of the city. He placed the umbrella on the table, across from the seat she used to take, the one he'd never seen anyone sit in. His coffee came. He didn't drink it. He just watched the rain. An elderly couple split a slice of apple pie. A child counted raindrops in a way only children can. And Caleb, a writer who once had everything, wanted only to find someone to ask one simple question. Why did you write that? Not because he believed the note was meant for him, but because he needed to know. Was there anyone else out there who also felt the ache of leaving something behind they no longer had the strength to carry? As night fell, he stood up. The umbrella still rested on the table. He decided he would take it with him. The rain had eased. He stepped outside and opened the umbrella, not to shield himself from the drizzle, but as if holding up a giant folded letter, one that kept unspoken things safe from the world. And in a brief, delicate moment on the threshold of the cafe, the opened umbrella brushed lightly against someone stepping in. A slender girl in a grey sweater. Their eyes met. Lara didn't recognize Caleb, but her gaze caught for just half a second on the umbrella before she walked on as if unwilling to let anything show. Caleb stood still. He didn't call out. He wasn't sure. But the feeling, that strange pull, was like fate had leaned in to whisper a word in his ear, soft as ink bleeding in the rain. Lara. And for the first time in years, Caleb felt truly curious. In the days of rain that followed in Seattle, Caleb chose the same cafe, the same table by the window, at the same time each afternoon. Not too early, not too late. The hour when lonely people tend to appear, not to drink coffee, but to find a place where their loneliness doesn't feel so alone. And Lara came too. They didn't speak at first. Two strangers, separated by a single empty table, both watching the rain, both choosing tea over coffee, both carrying in their eyes a shade of sorrow without a name. Caleb recognized her immediately, the girl who'd left behind the umbrella, the one he hadn't called out to though he'd wanted to. She didn't know who he was, and Caleb, for reasons he hadn't quite named, chose to keep it that way. The first time they truly spoke was on the third rainy afternoon. Lara walked in, her dark coat damp with scattered drops, a slim book in hand. She sat at her usual spot, across the window, where she had once left her umbrella behind. Caleb had arrived earlier, but this time, instead of pretending to read or scribble notes, he turned and smiled. "The tea here's never quite hot enough to chase off the cold," he said. "But sometimes it's just warm enough to make you forget it for a while." Lara blinked, slightly surprised. Not because the line was charming, it wasn't, but because it didn't sound like someone trying to start a conversation. It sounded like something said to no one in particular, light and unassuming. "I usually get the black tea," she replied softly. "It's just bitter enough to remind me I'm still alive." Caleb smiled. There was something about the way she spoke that made him feel small, not in the ordinary way, but in the way a man used to writing about others suddenly finds himself being written by someone else without their meaning to. "I'm Caleb," he said, but didn't add a last name. "Lara," she answered, and looked down at her book. Caleb tilted his head. "What are you reading?" She held out the cover, a worn paperback from his first year as a writer, the original edition, not the revised one. He stared at the title, then at her hands, slender, but holding the book as if afraid it might dissolve in her grip. "You like that one?" he asked, voice low. Lara nodded, then whispered, "There's a line in it I've never forgotten. I didn't write it because I believed it, but because I was afraid if I didn't, I'd forget I ever had." Caleb went still. That line had never been quoted in any review, never highlighted or praised. It was buried deep in a chapter, written one night when his heart had almost come undone, after his best friend, his co-writer, had walked out after a fight. Caleb had written it alone. He'd never thought anyone would remember. He took a breath, smiling with a quiet astonishment he didn't try to hide. "Not many people remember that line." Lara tilted her head. "I read like I'm searching for maps in the wreckage. That one felt like a map." In that moment, without music, without explanation, with only the sound of rain and two eyes meeting, it became clear to both of them they were no longer strangers. Something had shifted, not loudly, but unmistakably. Caleb rested his hand on the tea. It wasn't hot, but it still held a trace of warmth. "If you found a line in a book that felt like something you once thought but never said, what would you do?" Lara answered without looking up. "I'd keep writing it, no matter who wrote the first line." He didn't know what else to say. For the first time in years, Caleb didn't try to steer the conversation. He let it drift, like the rain outside, soft, constant, carrying a rhythm that couldn't be put into words. When Lara stood to leave, Caleb stood too. She didn't notice, but as she walked out, leaving behind an empty chair and her tilted book on the table, Caleb simply looked at it and smiled. She remembered that line, he whispered, as if reminding himself that maybe, just maybe, what he once wrote was still being held by someone out there. The rain came earlier than usual on that 6th afternoon. Though it was only 3:30, the sky had already dimmed to dusk. The cafe on the corner of Fremont Street sat quieter than usual, just a scattering of solitary souls reaching for warmth in their cups and in the stillness. Caleb arrived early. He took his usual seat by the window, leaned back, and watched the world blur behind the fogged glass. The cream-colored umbrella was not with him today. He'd begun to realize he didn't need it anymore, because now he no longer came here to hide. He came to wait. Not long after, Lara walked in. She wore the same soft grey sweater, her hair tied low, neat as always. She nodded to Caleb, and something familiar flickered in her eyes, no longer guarded, just quietly known. They sat across from each other, and once again the rain was their gentle background music. This time Caleb brought a notebook, not to write, but to keep his hands from saying too much. Something in him had begun to want to be seen, and that want came with fear. Fear that if Lara knew who he was, this fragile thread between them might snap. "You seem like someone who used to write," Lara said softly, stirring her mint tea. "The way you ask things, the way you listen." Caleb gave a small smile. "I used to. Now, I'm relearning silence." They both laughed, lightly, but the quiet was broken too soon. A middle-aged man stepped into the cafe, dragging in the cold with him. His gait was stiff, his eyes scanning the room. When they landed on Caleb, they stopped. Caleb recognized that look. The man walked over, stopping at their table. No greeting, no smile, just a question, pointed and plain, directed only at Caleb. "You're Caleb Rayner, aren't you?" Caleb froze. The man gave a thin, unfriendly smile. "I read your first book, and all the articles that came after." His gaze flicked to Lara for the briefest second. "Hope she knows who she's sitting with." Caleb said nothing. The man shrugged and turned to leave. But before the door swung shut behind him, he tossed one last remark over his shoulder, loud enough for half the room to hear. "Writing one true sentence takes talent. Living by it, that takes courage." The bell above the door rang and he was gone. The cafe went still. Lara didn't speak for a while. She stared at the rain. Then slowly, she turned to him, for the first time with a look that wasn't angry but searching, steady. "You're Caleb Rayner." Caleb swallowed, then nodded. "They say, but you plagiarized," Lara said, her voice calm but filled with truth. He didn't defend himself, didn't deny it. Lara held his gaze. "Did you actually write that book?" Caleb leaned back. His hands clenched the notebook, then let it go. "I wrote some chapters," he said, "but not the best ones." He hesitated. "My friend, the one who passed, he wrote those." She was quiet. He kept going, his voice smaller. "Now, I didn't speak up, didn't deny it, but I didn't tell the truth either. I thought, if I stayed quiet, it would all fade." She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Silence can be a kind of lie too. No tears, no accusations, just a quiet disappointment that hollowed him out more than any fury ever could." She stood, slow and composed. He called, "Out, Lara." She turned back, her eyes softer than moments ago, but heavier too. "I'm not disappointed that you were wrong. I'm disappointed you didn't believe you could make it right." Then she walked away. The rain hadn't stopped. Caleb remained alone with a cooling cup of tea, an empty chair, and the reflection of her gaze still lingering on the window pane. He knew he had just lost something real. But for the first time in 3 years, he felt something lift, like her words, even in their ache, had cracked open a final necessary door. That morning the rain had stopped, but the sky remained a familiar shade of ash, as if the entire city hadn't quite woken from a long night of restless dreams. Caleb drove out of town, not far, just enough to pull away from all the noise, the kind inside and out. He brought no laptop, no notebook, just a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and an old letter sealed in plastic, the edges wrinkled from the tears of a long-ago night. The cemetery rested on a low hill where his friend, the only person who had known the deepest layers of that first book, had been buried on a windless afternoon 3 years before. His name was Jonas. Caleb walked slowly across the damp grass. He hadn't returned since the funeral, partly because of the memories, partly because of the reflection he saw in the mirror afterward. Jonas had been his closest friend since college, the first to read his awkward early drafts, the one who edited every sentence in red ink, the one who wrote the parts where the characters told the truth, back when Caleb didn't yet have the courage to write his own. Jonas's name never appeared on the cover. That was something Caleb had never found a way to change, because by the time the book was released, Jonas was gone. A car crash, a rainy night, driving home after a pointless fight. Caleb never got to say sorry, never got to say goodbye. He stood before the simple headstone, which bore only a single line, Jonas Witt, keeper of unwritten stories. Laying the flowers down, Caleb sat on the damp ground. From inside his coat he pulled out the letter, Jonas's letter sent just a week before the accident. He'd never finished reading it. It opened the way Jonas always opened things, with a joke. If you're reading this because I'm dead, then sorry, but I still don't forgive you for letting me write the best part and still putting your name in the biggest font. Caleb laughed, but it caught in his throat, crumbling into silence. Then came the shaky, scrawled handwriting, words that struck like pins beneath the skin. I know you're scared. You're scared people will think you're not good enough. But Caleb, if you stay quiet, no one will ever know how hard you tried, even if you got it wrong. I don't need the credit. I just need you to look at what you've been avoiding. Caleb folded the letter and pressed it to his chest, holding it like someone he had never held long enough. Then he cried, not loud, just the gentle tremor of shoulders, eyes shut tight, as if afraid the flood within might swallow him whole. He sat there for a long time, no people, no music, no tragedy, but the one made of years of silence. A sparrow landed on a branch nearby. The wind swayed the trees in slow rhythm. There were no words from the earth, but inside Caleb, something began to clear. He reached for his phone and typed into his notes app. Silence is a kind of sin, too, especially when it hides the truth someone spent a lifetime trying to write. He didn't know who it was for, but it was the first line he'd written in 3 years. Not for anyone else to read, but for himself, to remember. On the drive back, Caleb left the music off. He didn't think about Lara. He didn't think about the man from the cafe, or the readers, or the publishers. There was only one line, slow and steady, echoing inside him, reminding him why he had once written at all. If I don't write it down, I'll forget I ever believed it. No one waited for him at the cafe that day, but there was a seat, empty, where Lara used to sit. Caleb placed a second bouquet there, another set of white petals, tousled by wind. No note, no explanation, just an act. Quiet, like a belated apology, meant with all his heart. That afternoon, the rain in Seattle didn't come down hard, but it lingered, as if the sky were trying to postpone something inevitable. The air was chilled, tinged with the damp scent of brick and rotting maple leaves, and everything seemed to move at half its usual pace. Caleb sat in the old cafe, the place where everything had begun, where a forgotten umbrella had once asked a question larger than any chapter he'd ever written. On the table before him was a cup of black tea, the kind Lara used to order. He had come here every day since telling the truth, but Lara hadn't returned. Not a word, not a note. She had vanished from the cafe as though she'd never been there at all, as if every conversation, every quiet moment between them had been nothing more than a flicker of memory imagined by someone desperate for connection. Rain clung to the window, blurring the world beyond, but Caleb kept watching, as if hoping the film reel of time might loop back to the moment people usually miss, too busy speaking to notice it. And then, in a breath of time so fine it blurred the line between memory and dream, he saw her. Lara. She stood across the street, just outside the glass. No umbrella. Her coat soaked, dark hair plastered to her forehead and collar. Her face was pale, but her eyes, they weren't angry, only still. and quietly sad. She didn't enter, didn't knock, didn't signal. She simply stepped to the edge of the cafe's stoop, the same place where Caleb had once picked up her umbrella. From her bag, she drew a small white envelope and gently tucked it into the curve of the umbrella's handle, the one Caleb had hung by the door, like something no longer in use, but not ready to be let go. Her hand brushed the handle, a tender parting. A farewell without words. Then she turned and walked away. Caleb shot to his feet, rushed outside, but by the time he reached the door, Lara was already down the block. She didn't look back, didn't hurry. She walked through the rain, as if it were the last place she still trusted to hold her. He watched her go, said nothing. Maybe because he understood. Some footsteps need to walk away. Some answers can only arrive when the one asking has finally stopped justifying the question. He bent down and picked up the envelope. White paper, handwriting soft and curved. "I'm not angry you kept the truth. I'm just sad you didn't believe you were worthy of redemption. The umbrella, you can keep it. But don't hold on to anything else that isn't true. I read that book many times, not because of who wrote it, but because it made me feel less alone. You did that once, and I still believe you can again. Write again. Not for others to believe, but so you can begin to live honestly. No name, no signature." But each word grazed his chest, not drawing blood, but deep enough for him to know he had been forgiven. Not with declarations, but with the gentlest silence. Caleb sat on the stoop, the letter in his hands. He didn't know how long he remained there, only that when he finally looked up, the rain still fell, but it no longer felt cold. Boy ran past, red jacket flashing through the mist, holding a small toy umbrella. When he saw Caleb sitting there, he stopped, looked at him and smiled. "Are you sad?" the boy asked. Caleb nodded slightly. "A little." The boy pulled a purple crayon from his pocket. "I have a pen. When I'm sad, I draw. You should try." Caleb accepted the crayon, stunned. A small gesture from a small stranger, like the final nudge from the universe reminding him, it's time, not to be published, not to reclaim glory, but to begin again, to live again, as himself, fully. He smiled, rose slowly, and stepped back inside. For the first time in years, Caleb opened his laptop, and he wrote, not a story, but a confession. In the only language he had ever truly trusted, the language of things left unsaid. That morning, the rain hadn't yet arrived. Seattle's sky seemed to have been dried overnight by wind, leaving behind pale streaks of cloud drifting slowly past the treetops. The air carried the scent of damp leaves, old books, and a faint trace of longing. Caleb returned to the cafe. He didn't know why, or rather, he no longer needed a reason. His feet had memorized the rhythm of the brick-lined street. His hand knew the feel of the creaking wooden door. But today, something was different. The moment he stepped inside, his eyes landed on something familiar, the cream-colored umbrella, placed exactly where it had once been left for him to find. And beside it this time, a small envelope. No. One said a word. The barista simply smiled, soft and knowing, as if they'd all been waiting for this moment. Caleb walked over, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the letter. No fear now. No hesitation. He opened it right there, as if his heart had already been open for some time. The handwriting was familiar, light as a whisper. Caleb, I didn't come to say goodbye. I came to return what you once gave me. The feeling that someone out there understood, even if only through a few words. I read your new chapter. Even if it's just a draft, I knew it was real. Not because of the story, but because I could see you. For the first time, you let yourself be seen without hiding. I won't come back to this cafe. Not out of anger, but because I believe. The most beautiful things should remain where they first touched us. If you keep writing, don't write to be believed. Write the way you once made me quiet in the middle of a rainy afternoon. Lara. Caleb didn't cry. Instead, he smiled. A rare smile, unforced, free of sorrow. A strange stillness filled him, like every cell in his body had just been gently soothed. He held the umbrella in his hand and stood there for a long while. "Are you sad, mister?" The small voice came from a nearby table. Caleb turned. A boy, maybe 6, with wild hair and a dinosaur shirt, stared at him with eyes clear as water. "I'm sorry, what?" Caleb asked, surprised. "You look sad," the boy repeated, then pulled a worn purple crayon from his backpack and offered it to him. "When I'm sad, I draw the sun. You should try." Caleb bent down and took the crayon, smiling, not out of pain, but because for the first time he felt light. "Thank you," he said. The boy nodded solemnly and scampered back to his mother. Caleb sat down and placed the crayon atop the notebook he'd abandoned weeks ago. He didn't open it right away. He just rested his hand on the cover and closed his eyes. In his mind, Lara's final words echoed, "Write the way you once made me quiet in the middle of a rainy afternoon." And Caleb understood. Some letters don't need answers, but they're carried forever in the heart of the one who receives them. The rain began to fall, softly, as if the sky too had remembered how to breathe. And Caleb sat there, not hiding, not lying, not afraid of being seen, just being himself. The morning in Seattle was thick with fog. Sunlight hadn't yet reached the familiar corner table of the cafe, but Caleb was already there, laptop open, fingers brushing the keys, as if each word tapped gently against his own heart. No more character maps. No more high-stakes plots. No more invented personas to hide behind. He was writing himself. The new manuscript bore a simple title, The Ghost Behind the Lines. It wasn't a novel. It wasn't a memoir. It was a letter, a long, quiet one, addressed to Jonas, to Lara, to anyone who had ever read something and felt understood without knowing why. In it, Caleb told the truth, that the best chapters weren't his, that they belonged to a friend who no longer walked the earth. That his silence hadn't come from deceit, but from the aching belief that he didn't deserve to make things right. He wrote about the umbrella, about the rain-soaked afternoons, about a girl who once left behind a line so simple it stopped him in his tracks after years of running. He didn't sign his name. He didn't need to. Because this time, the name didn't matter. Weeks later, in a different city, one lined with narrow houses and salt-stung breezes drifting over rooftops, Lara opened the mailbox at her new apartment. Among the flyers and bills and folded catalogs was a thick, white envelope. No return address. She opened it. Inside was a manuscript, cleanly printed, carefully bound. The first page held no author's name, just a quote written in soft purple ink, the handwriting slightly smudged. Silence is a kind of sin, too, especially when it hides the truth someone spent a lifetime trying to write. Lara sat down on the front step, a calm afternoon unfolding around her. She read slowly, deliberately, each sentence feeling as though it had been written just for her, each paragraph spoken like a whisper near her ear. Halfway through, she laughed, not loudly but with her whole self. There were pieces of her in the pages, in questions, in glances, in quiet presences. But no name, no apologies, no final "I'm sorry" or "thank you," only truth, unadorned, gentle. Enough to make her believe that people could begin again, from the very first word. When she folded the manuscript closed, the sky had begun to turn. Rain threatened on the horizon, but she didn't stand. She closed her eyes, let the breeze stir her hair, let the rain kiss her face. No flinching, no hiding. Somewhere, perhaps, Caleb was sitting just the same, not writing now, but waiting. For rain, not to shield beneath an umbrella, but to remember the feeling of a sentence saving someone even when the writer never knew it had. The story doesn't end with an embrace or a reunion. It ends with an unsigned letter and a reader who no longer needs to ask who wrote this, because she knows the writer is the one who dared to tell the truth, even if it came late. And sometimes, one person willing to do that is enough to keep us believing. Thank you for staying until the final page, where the quietest truths often echo the loudest. If you've been carrying a truth too long unsaid, remember, the bravest thing isn't being forgiven, It's being honest with yourself. And if this story made you pause even for a moment, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep walking together through stories that heal, one word at a time.